Ukrainians are a hard-headed lot, and they have an enormous sense of freedom, drive to be free. It's an understanding that it's either you live free or you're dead. You know, life in the twilight zone is no life and is not worth living. And so they go for the max, which is, freedom. They see every day what people in Western Europe have stopped understanding, that you can lose your freedom tomorrow very easily. Look at the United States, right? But if you want to remain free, you really need to do something every day in order to retain it. And so I'm actually quite worried about what is going to happen in the United States, because people in this beacon of democracy have no history of resistance against a authoritarian or totalitarian regime. It's one thing when you talk about it. The second is it when you actually need to do something. Putin's narrative has always been that Maidan was organized by the Americans. Actually, I think the Americans can use a bunch of Ukrainians to teach them how to have a Maidan in Washington, D.C.
Йде назустріч наступному дню, а літаки паритяги чекають команди рушати.
Hello and welcome to Talking Ukraine in English. My guest today is Robert Van Voren, who is a Canadian-born, Dutch-educated, based in Lithuania, working in Ukraine, human rights activist, political scientist, mental health specialist that I am really interested to talk to today, and some of the work he's been doing now and over the years, or decades really at this point in Ukraine. And also you're in Kyiv right now, so we want to also get your take on current events and what the feeling and mood is like over there. But why don't we just do a quick little backstory of give us like your 2-minute pitch of who is Robert Van Voren if someone doesn't know, and like why are you qualified to talk about Ukraine? Just you have an extensive resume, I know. So we can try to get like the elevator pitch maybe.
So basically, I mean, you push the right button. So I'm a human rights activist. I got involved in human rights in the then Soviet Union in 1977. Was mainly interested in dissidents winding up in psychiatric hospital for political reasons. Set up an organization in '78, then established what is now the Federation Global Initiative on Psychiatry in 1980. So 45 years ago. This is our celebration year. And I was a courier to the human rights movement in the Soviet Union for 10 years. And then in 1990, we started work in the field of reforming mental health care services in the then still Soviet Union. And my first visit to Ukraine was in 1990. My friend Samuel Glusman, who served 10 years in camp and exile for opposing the political abuse of psychiatry here, said, well, why are you all the time coming to Moscow? Just go to Kiev. It's much more interesting. There is nobody there. You can do anything you want. And so I came here in December 1990 and didn't go back to Moscow for 15 years. And now, of course, since Maidan, it would be a one-way ticket going to Moscow. So I've been working here now for, 35 years, mental health care, human rights, so the crossroads between the two. And for me, Ukraine is like home. Before COVID, I would come here 3 times a month. Then it was easy. I could fly in the morning, fly out in the evening. And since the invasion in 22, I come here basically every month, initially just to be with my friends, but then gradually develop more and more projects that are related to the war. And now I'm completely overwhelmed with all the things that we're doing here. But it's really good to be here. For me, it's easier to be here than in Vilnius, because here I'm with my friends. I know what's happening. I hear the air defense. I hear the Shaheds. And so I don't have to worry because I'm in it myself.
Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, I feel like there's maybe like it's easier to, if you're passionate about this cause, it's easier to be there and be around people who are of the same mindset than being in Europe, even if it's Eastern Europe, where people are still like removed from that to some degree, right? Is that?
Yeah, so so I live in Lithuania. Lithuania is good because it's a frontline state. We understand that we are quite possibly the next. And so the mentality in Lithuania is focused on war, the possibility of war, and that is psychologically much more easy to deal with. When I go to, for instance, the Netherlands, where I still have my kids and the financial administration of my foundation, I feel very uncomfortable because they have no idea what is happening. And even though there are people that are supporting Ukraine, the war is so far off that I'm always happy when I get on the plane back to Vilnius because then I'm in a more pleasant psychological environment, even though the threat is there. But maybe that is exactly why it makes it easier there.
Yeah, I would say it's similar in Germany here, where there's, it's very far removed for a lot of the people here, except for like, the percentage of people who are really actively still involved. I mean, I guess people have become tired of it. It's somewhere out there, and the people want to go on with their lives, and the novelty of it has sort of worn off, and it's like, okay, it's not my problem.
Yeah, that fatigue is, I think that fatigue is everywhere. I see it in the number of donations that we get, the number of people that are engaged. I notice it here with my friends. 3 years of war has really had an impact. The other day, I was talking to a friend who, couldn't sleep during the night because of the alarms, and she was telling that she now just sleeps. She got so used to the alarms every night that it's like living next to the railroad track. You get used to the sounds, and that's it, right? I never really had a problem with the alarms because I just sleep. The only time when I wake up is when the air defense is working and they manage to hit a Shahed or something else, and then you have these loud bangs. And then you wonder what to do, go down or not go down, get yourself dressed. So I never make it further than getting dressed and looking out of the window if I see anything. And then it kind of calms down and go back to bed. It's for me, but I taught myself this in the 1980s when I was a courier to the human rights movement, is you need to put yourself in a psychological state that it's kind of defense mechanism that it doesn't really touch you. So I always tell myself that there's a bigger chance to be run over by a tram in Amsterdam than being hit by a missile here in Kiev. Right? And when you're outside, you don't really realize how huge this country is. And that, even when it's an intense night of bombardments, it's only very few places that are actually touched upon, right? The vast territory is basically living as if there is no war. It's this very paradoxical situation. I'm now in Padil, on Sagadachnova. When you go here out in the evening, all the bars are open, all the restaurants are open. It's as if there is no war going on, right? And
And
that
that's
makes it also for a lot of my friends who are at the front line very difficult to come here because they know what is happening there, and when they're here, their buddies are there being killed, and so usually when they get out, they just want to go back. They want to go back to the front because it's safe in a strange way, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I want to get into when we talk about veterans and mental health and that kind of thing. But before we start to get into that, I mean you're in Kyiv now. This has been like a couple weeks since the Zelensky and Trump sort of blow up in the office, and the Trump, pivot to Russia. I mean, he's always been had a special place in his heart for Russia, it seems, but like now it's become more apparent to everyone. I mean, what's the mood on the ground in Ukraine and with the people you've talked about? Like, do they, like, do they feel like, oh, Zelensky should sort of like try to find some kind of agreement with Trump, or do they feel like, like if Trump is imposing like these Russian, propositions onto Ukraine, which are really in Russia's favor, that Ukraine needs to just break with American support? I mean, what's
Well, Trump, I mean, you can do a whole podcast or even five of them about Trump
yeah.
and his background. The guy is a malignant narcissist. He's a psychopath. He loves dictators. He's crazy about Putin. He's crazy about Kim Il Jong. This is the type of people that he can talk to because basically he functions like a capo, like a mafia boss. And so this setting there in the oval room, that was a typical mafia meeting, to pull someone down and to it was completely orchestrated. Everything was preset. And whatever Zelensky would have done, except go on his knees and lick Trump's boots, this would have happened. It's very clear. So I think, the more Trump pushes, the more support Zelensky gets here. As you can see in the polls, it's going up quite steeply. Trump is going down, Zelensky is going up. People are really tired of the war. I have friends who spend their whole day in being part of the war effort, and who say, well, I really just want peace. Let's get this over with, but not on the terms that Putin is imposing or that Trump wants, right? People understand that the eastern part, the territories that are now occupied, are gone for a while. There are a lot of people talking about the kind of German scenario. You lose them for decades, but eventually they will come back. Crimea is a very sad story because of the Crimean Tatars, who are horribly repressed. But the interest among Ukrainians for Crimean Tatars is actually quite limited. It was all the time, right? Also before 2014, before the annexation. And so I think there is a war fatigue, but there is also a absolute determination not to give up this country and not to agree to any imposed kind of pseudo peace, right? And then then rather just keep on fighting and try to get rid of these bastards.
Yeah.
So my problem with a lot of what is being said outside the country is, I'm invited to conferences, et cetera, and very often the talk is that, oh, we are going to win this war, and oh, we're going to rebuild the country, and oh, everything will be perfect. And actually, whatever happens, the future for Ukraine is extremely difficult. It's going to be a catastrophe. Whatever happens, it's going to be a catastrophe. Because I think a lot of the people that left the country will not come back. So there will be a lack of workforce. The psychological consequences are huge. If you scale down the armed forces to, what is being discussed, like 500,000, you will have 500,000 people going back home, many of whom who have seen the horrible things at the front line. So this will cause put an enormous pressure on society, which is not ready for this. The women and children that go back, who have been living outside the country, will be faced with husbands, fathers, brothers who have been at the front line. So you can imagine domestic violence. You can imagine the level of divorce. One of the areas in which I'm working is trying to prepare the penitentiary service for the influx of veterans. Now they start to realize that there will be thousands that will wind up in the prison. So what are you going to do with them? How are you going to separate them from the criminals? And so you're looking at a disaster area. And I think it's very important to, be real, to really understand that this is going to happen, because otherwise you cannot prepare yourself for this, right? And I think that story needs to be told. So usually I'm Like there was a conference in Vilnius 2 weeks ago, and everybody was saying, "Well, let's end our talk optimistically." Well, I cannot end my talk optimistically because I'm very much an optimist, but I'm also a realist, right? And I know what is going to happen here.
Yeah, I mean, I've said, in sort of personal conversations that to some degree, Putin has achieved his aims of disrupting Ukrainian society without physically taking over like all of Ukrainian territory because he's created so much, family separation and physical trauma, mental trauma. I mean, the war, for us who haven't seen it firsthand, it's even hard to comprehend on the scale that it's happening and like what are the repercussions from this violence, this intense violence that was only just in like books that like in our lifetime. I mean, you've been working in this region for a while, and this was something like that was from the past that like you didn't think that this would happen today, but it has, and it's like impossible, I think, to really comprehend the devastation within the society that is happening beyond just what's happening on the front line, and that's what I think is interesting about like where your focus is at, because that's where you're specialized in, and that's not talked about so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. Quite a lot of my friends have joined the army in one way or another. They're in drone units. They're at the front line, or they have been wounded. They came back. They are trying to reintegrate into a kind of civil society and then still, participate in the defense of the country. The strange thing is, also for myself, is that you, in a way, get used to the destruction, the mental and the physical destruction, also the buildings. So, for instance, I did a lot of work in Donetsk Oblast in Slavyansk. So you have to cross this bloody narrow bridge in Izum, right, when you're heading east. And I've been back to Izum at the end of last year, and basically every second building has been, hit or partially destroyed or fully destroyed. And it doesn't evoke any strange extra emotion almost. You got so used to destruction by what you see on your Telegram channels that when you see it in real life, it fits. This is the new life, the new environment.
Mm.
What is I think when talking to people there is what is really devastating. They had the Russians once with all the consequences. Outside the Zoom, you have this mass grave in the forest where 400 people were buried who were murdered in the cellars, during the Soviet Russian occupation. But what is very strong there is the fear that they might be coming back. They understand that if the Russians come back, what is going to happen, right? Because this is with such a vengeance. It's pure destruction. Kill whatever you can kill. And yeah, I think you're right. Putin did two things. One is he created enormous destruction, which will take generations for this country to recover from. But he also has been extremely effective in nation building. I remember in the 1990s, it was not only Westerners who said, "Well, Ukraine, what is Ukraine? It might not last. It will kind of disappear." Right? There were a lot of Ukrainians that I knew. They had the Ukrainian passport. For them, it had no emotional connotation. Maidan changed that fundamentally. And this war has, made Ukraine probably, as far as national feeling, the strongest country on the European continent, right? And so, in that sense, Hitler wanted to have a white Germany, Aryan, with only blonde people, etc., etc. I remember 10, 15 years ago, I went with my then chairman to a German city just across the border from Germany. His family, 90% of his family was killed in the Holocaust. And he was sitting there with a big smile on his face because you could almost see no white, blonde, German on the streets.
Mm.
So Hitler tried one thing and got exactly the opposite. And I think the same counts for Putin. He tried one thing, he will get exactly the opposite. This is a free democratic country and with people who understand what it means to be free. And that freedom is something that you can lose easily and is something that you have to fight for. So this is exactly what he didn't want.
Yeah, I mean, he turned a lot of these pro-Russian people living in Ukraine who were Ukrainians to had to, or maybe were neutral to had to choose which side they're on, and I think the majority of them have chosen Ukraine. But do you think that message has gotten through to him? Like, I sort of like didn't believe he would ever do this because like it'd be even if they were able to conquer that territory. I mean, the invasion to begin with, like, how do you hold it, right? Like with so much like anti-Russian sentiment. But they had believed, I think, their own propaganda where, they believed there was just like a few radicals who were sort of these, patriots of Ukraine, which they call Nazis, and everyone else wanted Russia there. And, after 3 years of war, I'm still not sure if they understand, they think like do they think like America and NATO is like doing all this, like or do they understand that this is resistance from Ukrainians, like from the population?
I think there is a difference between kind of the average Russian on the street and Vladimir Putin. We've always been thinking that Putin was a kind of second-rate KGB officer because he was based in Dresden and not in Berlin. Actually, Dresden was much more important than Berlin because in Dresden there were no Americans, no Brits, no French, and they could do whatever they wanted. And so it's the station in Dresden that was running the Rote Armee Fraktion in Germany, doing all this subversive work, right? So I think Putin is actually a top-level KGB officer. But even worse, he is, for me, the perfect example of someone without any sense of empathy. There is a beautiful book written by a guy called Simon Baron-Cohen. He is the cousin of Borat, but he is a professor of psychology in Britain, and he has written this book, The Science of Evil, and explains how people can become mass murderer. And if you read this book, it's like you're reading a biography of Vladimir Putin. So he doesn't care for 1 minute that, they're now close to 900,000 dead and wounded as a result of this war. He doesn't care that Kursk Oblast, is destroyed. They blatantly say, well, we have no money to help you, sort it out yourselves. He is only interested in two things. One is money, and the other is power. It's a power game for him. And so I don't believe that there is an end to this war as long as he is there, because for him, he understands that when this war comes to an end, there will be a huge balcony from which he will fall. He cannot live without this war. Mm. And so basically what Putin is doing is similar to what Adolf Hitler did, which is that you need to have an internal and an external enemy. This is the only way in which, in German terms, you can build a Volksgemeinschaft, a unity among your people. Mm. So for Hitler, it was the Jews on the inside and the Allies on the outside. For Putin, it's the fifth column, the liberals in the country, and then the outside is NATO, and in particular the bloody fascists here in Kiev, the Kiev Gunta, as they call it. And then there is this wonderful mix of anti-Semitism, of course, which is, part of the philosophy of Putin, but also part of the philosophy of Trump. These two are actually, they are brothers in arms, you can say, right? Putin's narrative has always been that Maidan was organized by the Americans. Actually, I think the Americans can use a bunch of Ukrainians to teach them how to have a Maidan in Washington, D.C., right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Americans need to wake up a little to what's happening too. But like you said, it's happening so fast. I wanted to get back to something that you mentioned when you were talking about the Russians and like if they come back, that they're basically like a killing machine. And I'm sort of, so it's not just Putin, right? So the Russian population generally supports this war, and is ready to commit, atrocities and do like depraving things to humans and innocent civilians. Like, how do they get psychologically to that point? Like, why do you? I don't know. Like, where is like the humanness in this? I mean, supposedly they're going in to defend, Russian speakers, but they're committing all these atrocities against Russian speaking people primarily because those are the regions they've occupied. So like how do they get there to that point where they're able to like do this and take pleasure of it and torture and rape and like I don't know, like to me it's just like I can't understand it, like I don't know, do you have any thoughts about like how do they get to this cold-blooded sort of hatred?
Well, I can give you a very nice example. Like about, I think, 20 years ago, we organized a seminar here in the Central Psychiatric Hospital in Kiev, the Pavlovka, by an American who had schizophrenia, and he had this respect seminar, talking in 3 4 hours why you should respect your patient, the people with mental illness. And it's a beautiful seminar, and it came to an end. And then one of the psychiatrists got up and said, "Well, Mr. Slack, you have a wonderful presentation, but there is one problem. You want us to treat patients as human beings, but what to do when we ourselves are being treated like cattle?" And this is the crux. The Russian population are people who have no human value whatsoever. Today you're alive, tomorrow you're dead. Nobody is going to, wink because of this. It's part of being life. You're nothing. So that means that other people are also nothing. And if you combine that with, the usual consequence of war, when moral values and respect for other people goes down the drain, you create a population that can be turned easily into a murder machine, right? And there has been a lot of research about who were part of the killing machinery in the Nazi period during the Second World War. And one thing that comes out very strongly is that most of the killers were ordinary people. They were, bakers, administrators, civil servants, people who follow orders, who tell what they're being told to do, not psychopaths. Psychopaths are very difficult to manage. A killing machine doesn't need psychopaths. They need people who just follow orders and don't think themselves. And the Russian population has been, downgraded to a level that it was in the worst Stalinist period. So I mean, Ukraine has developed enormously since it became independent. It's a European country. By and large, Ukrainians are really normal thinking, freedom loving European people. Russia has had this slow start at the beginning in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, and then starting already in 1993, they have been sliding, and now they're back to 1937. So we've lost everything that has been done there in order to turn Russia into a normal country, and I think it will take generations before that country is normal. So I think the only thing that can be done is basically put a wall around that country and try to make sure that they cannot do the same to other nations, right? And that is something that Trump doesn't understand, because he has an Elon Musk next to him who has no empathy, who's even saying that empathy is the worst for mankind. He fits beautifully also in this book, The Science of Evil, right? And so he's surrounding himself with people who are just, I don't know. Look at the face of this Marco Rubio when in the Oval Office. He has people like Vance who are just his lapdog. They're barking when he says that they need to bark. So my feeling about Russia is, I have still a few Russian friends that I can communicate with. But the majority for me are just a lost cause. I'm not going to waste any energy on that anymore. You know, we tried in the early 90s, and it's more a matter of who is the one to turn off the light, the last one to turn off the light.
I think that, goes to the argument that if Russia has a victory here that they can walk away with, that just makes a continuation of their society as it is continue. Versus if there's any hope for change within Russia, they need to like have a loss here. Like Germany changed because they lost. I mean, Germany became occupied and there was like denazification, like real denazification happening. That's not going to happen in Russia, but somehow that for there to be change within Russian society, they need to be knocked out or
They need to be knocked out, and there needs to be an implosion. You know, there is no way that that country can continue the size that it is now, the composition that it is now. But I don't see that happening, at least not in the near future. And so the only thing you can do is, put this wall around, maybe not physical, but at least militarily. Make sure that they cannot do the same to any of the other countries that are neighboring them.
And that's what I think Trump fails to see, or he doesn't care about it. Like I posted about this the other day. Like you mentioned, he's this malignant narcissist that, he just looks, how can I benefit from this? Okay, so if I can extract some wealth to get money back from the minerals, great. I can pressure them there. That's my leverage. They're in a weak position. I have leverage over that. If I can, get a ceasefire and the killing to stop on, it's easier to do it on Russia's terms. Then I can claim the Nobel Peace Prize, and then I will get, the credit. And that's how he thinks. He doesn't think about what's going to happen, after he leaves office or, a couple of years from now, or like it's just not. He just doesn't give a shit about that. Right?
Well, he's a rotten real estate broker from New York, right? Who is just doing dirty business in order to get more wealthy than he is. And actually, he's a very bad businessman. I mean, he has been bankrupt for 6 times. He's running down the American economy with his tariff wars. It's complete, it's all baked air, what is happening.
Yeah.
But people are suffering. People are dying here at the front. Everything that happens, the moment they are not sharing intelligence, the moment they're not giving arms, people are dying because of that bastard in the White House. This is, I think, in my perspective, this is criminal, and he's responsible for it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised that so many Republicans are going along with it too. Like that they're just so afraid of, getting his scorn that they're not willing to stand up for what's they know is right. I mean, it's absurd.
Well, a friend of mine wrote a book about 15 years ago, the first 100 days of Adolf Hitler. And so people forget that Hitler came to power democratically, and that democratic Germany voted themselves out, and that in 100 days he changed a democratic society into a totalitarian one.
Mm.
And Trump is halfway now. I think it's now the 49th day of his rule. He still has 50 days to go, and he is really trying hard. He's trying hard, and so in any society, I always am telling my students 95% of the population just goes along. It's compliance, survive, pretend that it doesn't concern you. You have a very small portion, I don't know, 3% that resists, that goes into the resistance, and you have a very small portion that collaborates. But the vast gray, majority doesn't concern me. Please don't ask me to, take a position. Because I have a job, I have a car, I have my television, I need to go on my holiday, I have kids, I have a wife, this type of stuff. And that enables people like Trump to do what they do.
Yeah. Maybe when they realize that things are getting more expensive, they might care more.
Eggs. Yeah, eggs.
All comes down to the eggs.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little about the work you're doing in Ukraine also. So, I did I worked as a translator for a New York Times story about this center that works with kids whose parents or fathers have died on the front. So, you know, they may be have no more parents, or usually one parent, the mother, is still around. But it was like a retreat. It was a therapeutic center. I think it was in Western Ukraine somewhere. Um, and this, I listened to like all the raw interviews and translated them, and it was brutal. I mean, it was, it was inspiring that the strength that these kids have, but it was just so sad and tragic. And um, they found some sort of comfort in being together with other kids who were in that situation and forming like a support group. And really, like, yeah, after working on this, I was like, man, I just want to go there and like be with these kids and like, you know, be like a father figure for them or something, to sort of like fill in that gap in their life. I mean, it was just, I'll send it to you later, but like that is going to happen on such a scale that I can't imagine. And what is the type of work that needs to be done in Ukraine in the coming years, and what are you doing specifically?
Well, so, interestingly, for kids, at the end of 23, I found in Berlin at the rehab center of the German Bundeswehr a booklet that they made for military who came back from deployment and had to explain to their kids why they behave differently, why they were aggressive or depressed or couldn't stand large sounds. And it's a very nice small book with mostly drawings that a military can take, sit on the couch with the kids next to him and explain, what is happening. And so we got copyright. We published it in October last year, 5,000 copies. They were gone in 2 months. We now, next week, we get the next 10,000. They are basically all pre-ordered. So we are now collecting money for the next 10,000. And this is a book that we will need hundreds of thousands, here. Because, if you have 1 million people at the front line or in the armed forces, how many kids are affected by, their parent being at risk is already, enough. And then we got a request to do a similar book for children whose parent had died. Because a book about Papa coming back and being depressed is, rather painful when Papa is not coming back. And so I looked around in Europe and North America, Australia for this type of literature, and it doesn't fit because the kids there they lose their parent, but they're living in a free, usually wealthy environment, or at least normal life, right? Peace. And the kids here lose their parent, but are at the same time at war, in a country at war. They hear the night sirens, they hear the bombings, they see what is happening. And so we are now going to work with the authors in creating a book specifically for this group, of which there are already tens and tens of thousands, right? These are large, large numbers. So basically what we are doing is trying to use our limited resources as effectively as possible. We are now working on setting up a knowledge center at Shevchenko University here in Kiev, the Veteran Mental Health Center of Excellence, which will focus on research, methodology, and training. We're setting up an e-learning platform with modules that people can freely use. The first one is finished by the end of this month, which is on community resilience. There's another one coming on working with families, peer-to-peer support. We are working on a smartphone app for operational resilience for people at the front line, what to do when they feel that their mental health is sliding because of the fighting, or they see their body going catatonic, for instance. So what do you do to pull them out of such a situation? And so, we have a whole range of projects. As I said, we're working in a penitentiary system. We set up 3 new prison mental health units. one in Drohobych, which is specializing in veterans winding up in the prison system. We're working on training Ukrainian artists to become art therapists for military and veterans. So, we're trying to do whatever we can to stem the tide, as it were, of psychological distress. And then there is one project we are now, gearing up is palliative care. Because the sad thing is that the interest in people who have been wounded to such an extent that they cannot go back to the front line is pretty minimal, right? So military who have been wounded and have been patched up, but they are not able to walk or they cannot see anymore, or they have a combination of problems, they're usually sent home and not rehabilitated. And you need to rehabilitate them because they need to be part of society. And then there is the group of military that have been wounded to such an extent that that they are almost certainly going to die. And you need to allow them to die in dignity. So there is one center outside Kiev which is dealing with this category of patients, and they're doing amazing work with almost nothing, and nobody is really interested in them. They don't appear in the press. They don't have foreign donors, and so we decided that this is a category that we have to take care of as well. And so we're now gearing up to develop a project for this palliative care patients. And there are now maybe, I don't know, hundreds, 500, 600. Nobody gives the data, but there will be many more coming. That's absolutely certain. And so, the country needs to prepare itself for it, whether it likes it or not.
How do they, when you say rehabilitate, the ones who aren't in the category where, they're close to passing away, but the ones who, have a chance to reintegrate in society and need rehabilitation, like what's the nitty-gritty of that? Like what do they need? Do they need job training? Do they need to talk to someone about what they experienced? I don't know. Like, what does that look like tangibly? Like what?
There are all kinds of different layers, different categories. The employment is a very important element, to help military return to civilian life. If you have a job,
like they have a purpose still in society.
Yeah, if you have a job, you have an income, you have a purpose. And so I think for them, part of them could be employed for peer-to-peer work, or, for instance, set up small workshops where you can repair prostheses, this type of stuff. The people that was now referring to are the ones that are, their wounds have healed, but they cannot walk because nobody took time to help them to learn walking again. They have lost their eyesight, but nobody has taught them how to deal with this disability. Those who have only one stump left, lost their arm and legs. There are lots and lots of these because this war, the drone warfare, the IUD warfare has resulted in horrendous, wounds that really disable people.
Mm.
And so this is very time consuming. In any normal country, a person would be in rehabilitation for, I don't know, half a year, maybe a year even. But here everything has to be quick, because, we need people back at the front line and all the resources are going in that direction. But the country needs to prepare itself also for life after the war. When you have these people in your society, and you want to avoid that they wind up in these social care homes, these psychoneurological internats, because there's nobody there to take care of them. And these are men and women who have given their life for their country. There is a moral obligation to help them and to help them to be part of society. So, traditionally, I'm usually looking at the areas in this country that nobody's interested in. So this is, again, one of those areas. And so we are doing what we can. That's basically, my message.
And where do you get funding from, or do you get private funding? Do you give grants? Like, is there some way someone who's listening to this might be able to get involved or help you or support anything?
Well, our donors are, it varies from governments. We get a lot of support from the Dutch government. We get money from the British Foreign Office. We get money sometimes from psychiatric associations. We get private money. We get it sometimes churches, their collection, they send their money. There are some businesses here in Ukraine who provide support. Um, we are now reconstructing this 1,300 square meters where our veteran mental health center of excellence will be, and the demolition is being done by Dobrabat, which is this volunteer organization. So wherever we can get support from, we are extremely grateful. So all little donations together, enable us to do big things, basically.
So how can someone contact you if they want to just, reach out to you?
Well, the easiest is via email, rvvoren@gmail.com, rvvoren@gmail.com, and then I will get back to them and explain what we're doing and send materials.
Okay.
It's the easiest way.
Okay. So there's one more sort of question topic I wanted to ask you, maybe this will be like a good one to end on, but what does it take for these people, these Ukrainians, to continue to go to war, knowing that they could die, that they're leaving their families? Like, I mean, it's been 3 years. I understand, like, people are, it's harder to find people to do it. But initially, there was a big voluntary drive of people, and like, what keeps them going psychologically, where they are willing to keep fighting? I guess, like, have you any insights into like, where does, I would say, courage, where does this courage and strength come from?
Ukrainians are a hard-headed lot. And they have an enormous sense of freedom, drive to be free. And so I've seen it after Maidan, like one of my friends, he is a historian, he volunteered after Maidan. He basically has been at the front ever since, right? It's an understanding that it's either you live free or you're dead. Life in the twilight zone is no life and is not worth living. And so they go for the max, which is, freedom. They see every day what people in Western Europe have stopped understanding, that you can lose your freedom tomorrow very easily. Look at the United States, right? But if you want to remain free, you really need to do something every day in order to retain it. And I think this country is a fantastic example to this. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I love coming here. Here I feel among like-minded people, right? I have the feeling that this is a life worth living for, and so do my friends, right? And the millions of people here in this country that are together fighting off this evil which is coming from across the border.
I think it's also something about the future of their kids, that they want to ensure that they are able to live in that freedom. They're willing to sacrifice their lives for the future that their kids and grandkids could have. I think that's a large part of what's always driven these Ukrainian movements, Maidan, like in my own personal interviews and interactions with people, it's always like, yeah, it's not about me, it's about my kids. So that there is like this strong family, desire for the future for generations.
Yeah. Well, which is part of, it's an aspect of being a nation that has always been, repressed, pushed around for centuries. It creates this, desire to create freedom for your future generation. I have the same feeling in Lithuania. Lithuania is, of course, also one of those crazy countries. Who could have imagined that in March 1990 they would declare independence? Definitely not Gorbachev, but they did it. And look, it's a free country. It's part of the European Union. It's part of NATO, and it's one of the strongest defenders of, supporters of the Ukrainians, because they understand what the Ukrainians are going through.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a privilege to be able to live in one and work in the other. Right.
Yeah. Well, you've been doing important work and, certainly unique. You bring a unique aspect with all your experiences to everything. So I hope you can continue doing it.
The funny thing is, my uncle was 23 when he joined the resistance in Rotterdam. He loved Rotterdam. Rotterdam was bombed away, and he got so pissed off that he joined the resistance without understanding what actually resistance was, right? Because they were kids. They didn't really understand what the Germans were going to do. And he remained at liberty until October 43. Then he was arrested, went to 7 camps, eventually died after having seen the Americans. So at least he was liberated. And for me, he has always been this example, right? And so Robert van Voren is actually his name from the resistance. It was his pseudonym. Now it's my pseudonym. And nobody even knows anymore that it's my pseudonym. It's very funny. So I'm a second generation, in that sense. And I feel that it's in a way, it's a feeling that I have the duty to continue his work, right? And so I've been doing this now for 48 years.
Yeah. Well, it's unique. Not everyone cares to, work on behalf of others as much as you have, and some other select few. Again, it's a very small percentage of people who sort of dedicate their life to doing that type of work that isn't necessarily financially benefiting them, and the first priority. Like where you care about what's happening to like other people in the world.
It's definitely financially not benefiting, I can tell you. But morally and spiritually, it's extremely benefiting. I know that I live. That's important.
Доки всі сплять, доки сонце іще не зійшло, гине вогонь, догоряє остання лампада, де той літак, що світанком візьме на крило і понесе. Там, де небо, тепло і зорепад, доки всі сплять, доки тиша скрипить за вікном, холод весни заповзає в кімнату над раннім, де той вокзал, що покличе сигнальним гудком і проведе між одвічними вперше й востаннє, доки всі сплять, доки сон обіймає рідню в світлі вогню, ти ледь чутно виходиш з кімнати, сонце встає, йде назустріч наступному дню, а літаки паротяги чекають команди рушати.